Okay, so this is part 5 of this steam shower where I installed the wall tile. The wall tile is a very large tile. It's actually 17 inches by 27 inches, as I recall. And it's a through body porcelain tile. So what that means is that the color that you see on the surface goes all the way through the tile. And because that is the case, instead of installing bullnose where I needed a finished edge, I was actually able to polish those edges. I'll leave a link in the description to show you how I usually polish edges. But anyway, this is part 5, as I said, and it's installing the wall tile throughout the shower. This is, I want to remind you, is a steam shower. You want to get on the back of the tile, because it's a wet area, and especially because it's a steam area, you want to get as close to 100% coverage as possible. So in this case, because it's such a large tile, I notched the thinset on the walls, and I also notched it on the back of the tile, and then I pushed the tile into the wall to get complete coverage. You always want to use the correct size trowel for the tile you're installing. This is a very large tile, so you're going to use a pretty big size notch trowel, 1/2 inch if you don't want to do both sides of the tile and the wall. You would probably use a 1/2 inch trowel. I used a smaller trowel and I notched both the wall and the tile. But one important thing that you have to remember is you have to use a tile designed for large and heavy tiles, and that's actually an LFT, which means it's for large format tiles. Sometimes they call it a large and heavy tile thinset, but the important thing about that is regular thinset is not designed to be built up beyond maybe a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch. So you can't make it that thick, otherwise it'll shrink and pull the tiles out of plane, and will also debond the tile. As it shrinks, it pulls away from the tile, leaving the tile unbonded. So large and heavy tile thinset can usually be built up to a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and it's designed for that purpose, so it won't shrink and won't pull away from the tile. Also, in this shower, I used a lippage system, or sometimes as they're referred to, or probably most times they're referred to as leveling systems. Leveling systems are not to fix problem substrates. So if the floor is wavy, or it's not flat, or it's got a big hump in it, or it's got a valley in it, you need to take care of that before you install the tile. Same with the walls. You want to get your walls as flat as possible. Lippage systems are just to tweak the last part of the tile. So if you've got a little bit of difference between height of the tile, one tile is higher than the other, the lippage system will bring them into plane. They're not meant to fix problem floors or problem walls, as I said. So, in my opinion, you get a superior installation with a lippage system, as opposed to not use them on large format tiles. I've often used them in videos as a demonstration on smaller tiles, like a 12 by 12, just to show that they can be used that way. But I generally, when I'm doing a smaller tile, like a 12 by 12, I don't use them. But on large tiles, I use them all the time. And that is because the inherent bow in a tile. Large format tiles are rarely flat. Some are worse than others, but some can be really bowed. And if you, especially if you're stacking the tiles, it's not as much of a problem. But if you're doing a running bond, which is like a brick pattern, what you're doing there is you're putting the high part of the tile up against the low part of the tile, so you get lippage. Lippage is the difference in height between the edges of the tile. So with a good lippage system, like I'm using here, I'm actually using the Perfect Level Master T-Lock system. Great system, use it all the time. And there are other good systems, but this is the one I like to use for porcelain tiles. So it'll pull them into place and lock them in place as the thinset dries, so nothing moves. And You want to keep your edges as clean as possible so you don't get any thinset coming through the grout joints, and that's about it. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I'm gonna fast forward through a lot of it because there's a lot of just basically spreading thinset, installing tile, but I'll try and point out some things that you should take into consideration when you're installing your tile. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like, leave a comment. I'll try to answer it. I can't get to all the questions, but I try to answer as many as possible. So thanks again, and enjoy. Okay, so as you can see, I've already spread some thinset, and I already got one tile on. So the point that I want to make here is that I have spread the thinset, in this case, because I'm on Schluter Kerdi-Board, I'm using an unmodified thinset, and the unmodified thinset I'm using is an LFT thinset. It's made for large and heavy tiles. So the thinset on the wall is all spread and evenly notched in one direction. I like to go up and down. Some guys like to go left to right. I like to go up and down in most cases. Because I'm not using a really large tile, trowel, I'm also notching the back of the tile with the same thinset. That way I get complete transfer of the thinset to the tile, because I'm back buttering it, and the notches are going to go in the same direction as the notches on the wall. So when I put the tile on the wall, the notches are going to be in the same direction. You don't want them going in opposite directions. You don't want to do like a crosshatch. You want them to go in the same direction. So when you push the tile in, it's going to embed into the thinset, and the trowel lines are going to interlock and not cross over each other. Very important, because you want to, this is a steam shower and it's a wet area. The recommended coverage for a thinset in a wet area is 95 to 100%. In a dry area, it can be usually 80 to 85%. But in a wet area, you want to get as complete a transfer of thinset as possible. Also, this first row of tile is very critical. It sets the base for the entire wall. So you want to get that as perfectly plumb, perfectly flat, and perfectly level as possible, so that when you build on top of that, you follow with an even straight line, and you won't run into problems. If your base tile is not perfect, then you're going to have trouble trying to keep the tile above it straight and perfect. So on this first row, I always spend extra time to get it exactly right. So now I got my first row of tile on the bottom, perfectly flat, perfectly level, and perfectly plumb. So when I build on top of that, I know that I can, if I follow that, the rest of the wall will be the same. So I spread my thinset, get it, embed the tile, and then I'm going to use my level to check to see that I have full contact along both tiles from top to bottom. And that way I know that it is perfectly plumb and in plane with the tile that I just installed. And then when I get to the tile beside it, I'm going to do the same thing and put the level across. So now I'm going to use my margin trowel to clear the thinset right up against the edge of the tile. That way when I put the other tile in, I won't have any squeeze through in the grout line. Now because this is such a large tile, I'm going to put 2 of the Perfect Level Master clips, or the T-lock clips, along the short edge and 3 along the long edge. That way I can get some real good leverage into
bringing the tiles into plane. And these systems will usually always pull the tile into the thinset and not the tile away from the thinset. I get a lot of comments where people say, well, why, it's going to lift the tile, pull the tile up. It doesn't actually work that way. These leveling systems pull the tile down and into the thinset, not away from the thinset. Now, as I said earlier, you always want to spread your thinset so the lines, the notches of the thinset always go in one direction. And the reason you do that is because you want to be able to collapse those lines into each other when you press the tile into the thinset. If you have swirls or lines going in multiple directions, that's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to do. Lines going in several directions or swirls in the thinset will trap air and make the thinset impossible to collapse. So you keep the lines going in one direction, so with a back and forth motion or a wiggling of the tile, you can get those lines to collapse and get very good coverage on the tile. Without the straight lines, as I said, it's exceedingly difficult to do that. And it's very important that you get full contact of the tile into the thinset when you're setting tile. So another thing to remember, when you're going around the corner in a change of plane, you don't butt the tile on one wall tight against the tile of the other wall. You want to leave a small gap. I'll sometimes use wedges to maintain that gap, sometimes I won't, but you want to make sure that the gap is there, and that's going to be filled with a flexible caulk or sealant. The sealant or the caulk that I usually use is by the same manufacturer and is usually the same color as the grout, so that you get a good color match. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it's pretty close. Okay, so I got a couple of walls done. These have been able to set overnight, and now it's going to be time to knock off these clips and do a little cleanup. So I'm going to use a rubber mallet to knock off these clips, and if you've kept your grout lines clean and you've done everything right, all the clips will break off cleanly, and you won't have any break off above the tile. So this bronze circle you see here that I'm measuring around is part of the steam generator. So it's going to have a faceplate on it, but there's not a lot of play that will, to cover any errors. So I have to get it as close and as perfect as possible. And so I'm just marking it out, and this is one way of doing it. You can take measurements. I like usually to do it this way, and just transfer my marks, and then get the position of the hole on the tile, and then cut it out with a diamond hole saw. I actually have several videos that demonstrate how to cut a hole with a diamond hole saw. I will try and put some links in the description to those as well. So sometimes you come to a tile that presents a bit of a challenge. And this one here had multiple holes in it, and it had to be exactly in the right position. So I basically marked it the same way as I marked the one for the steam outlet that you saw just a minute ago. And so I got this one exactly right. But if you notice here, right along this edge here, there's not a lot of thinset there. I will backfill that with a margin trowel before I put the next tile in. Just gotta. Sometimes there's a lot of things to take care of, and you want to make sure that you get good coverage on the back of the tile. And by doing that, I will support that edge. I don't have a video of it. I didn't think of doing it at the time, but this edge here, I did make sure that was completely supported. So no trim, by trim I mean bullnose, was available for this tile. So I could have used a Schluter metal along the exposed edges, but instead, because this was a through body porcelain tile, which means that the whole tile is all the same color all the way through, I decided with the client that we would just polish the edges and finish all the exposed edges that way. So these edges along the jambs and any other exposed edge were all polished along the seat. Were all polished to finish off those edges. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll use some tape. In this case it's actually Nashua tape, which is an aluminum tape, and I'll wrap the edge with it, put the spacer in where it needs to be, usually some wedges, and then adhere the tape, wrap it around the corner, and that will usually hold the tile in place pretty firmly. And especially when you're going in and out of the jam and you're working around it, it just helps avoid the tile moving if you bump it accidentally. And so that's how I usually handle these corners, or anywhere there's a bullnose that goes up against the tile. Okay, so any horizontal plane that's in the shower needs to tilt towards the drain. So the this bench seat needs to be slightly tilted towards the drain. So when any water that gets on it will run off and not towards the back wall. So that's very important. You don't want water standing anywhere. You want it to always to run off the horizontal surface and towards the drain. So from side to side, it's level, but from front to back, it's pitched forward, as I said, towards the drain. Okay, so that's all the tile in the shower stall. You'll see that there's a niche in here. I didn't show the installation of that, otherwise this video would have been an hour long. So the next video will be either about the floor, which is going to be a heated floor, electric floor heat, or it will be the accent wall. And so don't forget to subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe I gave you some useful tips.